Have you ever truly listened to the silence that follows when your words fall flat in a room full of people? Not just ignored, but absorbed into nothingness, as if your voice was never there to begin with. Have you noticed how often you smile when you don't want to laugh when something hurts? Nod politely when your soul is screaming for truth. There's a moment, subtle but undeniable, when you realize that you are not living in the world as yourself. You're performing, contorting, offering a version of you that doesn't disturb the surface. And when you finally retreat to the solitude of your own presence, there's a dull ache, a feeling of disconnection that you cannot quite name, a spiritual dissonance. Why do they speak over you, dismiss your needs, walk past your boundaries like open fields with no fences? Why do you shrink in your own life, hoping someone will notice the absence of your true self? You are not born invisible. You were taught to disappear, not with force, but with praise when they told you how good you were for being quiet, how mature you were for not complaining, how strong you were for tolerating pain in silence. And so you learned a secret language, survival through suppression. But Carl Jung warned us, what is not made conscious will become fate. And this is your fate now, a reality built from the silent agreements you made with yourself. Agreements that said, if I don't make a fuss, I'll be loved. If I don't ask for too much, they'll stay. If I keep bending, they'll finally see me. But what you never realized is that the more you yield, the more you vanish. And the world cannot respect what it cannot see. There is no cruelty greater than the one we inflict on ourselves in the name of being accepted. You think you're being kind, considerate, compassionate. But what you are really doing is negotiating with your own worth. You apologize before you speak. You explain when silence would be power. You say yes while your body tightens in quiet protest. And all the while you convince yourself that this is maturity, this is love, this is balance. It is not. It is a slow self-erasure. You've mistaken peace for submission. You've confused selflessness with self-neglect. And the consequence is this: you feel unseen, unheard, unvalued. But the deeper truth is far more piercing. You do not value yourself. Because valuing yourself would mean standing up in moments when it would cost you something. It would mean risking rejection to preserve your dignity. It would mean saying no when your whole nervous system is wired to please. It would mean admitting that you have needs, desires, limits, and that they matter. And that to the part of you that still carries the wounds of childhood feels like betrayal. Betrayal of the mask you've worn for years, the nice one, the dependable one, the one who never gets angry, never takes up too much space, never makes things complicated. But Jung knew the danger of over-identifying with the persona, the mask you wear to function in society. When the mask becomes your identity, the soul begins to rot beneath it. The self begins to whisper, then scream, then finally go numb. And so you find yourself here disrespected, not because the world is cruel, but because you have made yourself available to that cruelty without ever standing in your own sacred ground. The truth that will set you free is the same truth that will break you. First, you are complicit in your own suffering. Not because you deserve it, but because no one ever taught you how to choose yourself without guilt. You were praised for being easy, celebrated for being low maintenance, admired for how much you could carry. And now, when you try to set boundaries, it feels like sin. Saying no feels like violence. Walking away feels like abandonment. But what if it's not? What if saying no is the highest form of self-respect? What if walking away is the first step toward walking back to yourself? What if the discomfort you feel when standing your ground is not a signal that you are wrong, but proof that you are finally waking up from the spell of approval? This is what Jung called individuation, the sacred journey of becoming who you truly are, not who the world trained you to be. And individuation begins with conflict, inner conflict, the kind that makes you tremble when you speak your truth. The kind that makes you question every choice, every relationship, every belief you've inherited about who you're allowed to be. But without this conflict, there is no transformation. Without this fire, there is no gold. You are the crucible, now your silence, your rage, your longing, your guilt, all of it melting down into something raw and pure and unshakable. And when you emerge, you will not beg for respect. You will embody it, not through force, but through presence. The kind of presence that says, I know who I am and I no longer need your permission to exist. But let's speak plainly. This path is brutal. The first time you say no to someone who expects your compliance, they will not applaud. They will recoil. They will test you. They will guilt you. Not because they are evil, but because your boundaries reveal the places they were comfortable exploiting. When you stop saying it's fine to what clearly isn't, you become a mirror. They cannot escape. And some will leave. Let them. Respect does not cling to what diminishes it. Do not mourn the loss of those who only love the version of you that needed their approval. Mourn instead the years you spent waiting to be seen by people who only knew how to use you. Grieve for the parts of yourself you silenced to keep the peace, your voice, your anger, your intuition. And then, rise. Because now, finally, there is space for something new, the self-respecting you. The you who no longer entertains disrespect in the name of loyalty. The you who pauses before saying yes and asks, does this honor me? The you who is willing to walk alone rather than walk in chains. This is not selfishness. This is sacred rebellion. You're returning to yourself, the one you abandoned in 1,000 small ways just to be loved. And here's the secret no one told you. When you return to yourself, the world must either meet you at your new level or fall away. And both outcomes are a gift. You do not need to convince anyone of your worth. You only need to stop abandoning it. Respect begins not with how others treat you, but with what you allow. And what you allow is a direct reflection of what you believe you deserve. So ask yourself, not with judgment, but with deep curiosity, why have you allowed so little? What ancient fear whispers that love will vanish the moment you assert yourself? What unspoken vow have you made to stay small so others can feel big? These questions are not accusations. They are invitations into the shadow, into the hidden, repressed parts of you that have been running the show from behind the curtain. And Jung said clearly, the shadow must be faced, not fought, not fixed, faced, seen, integrated. Because until you do, you will keep projecting your unclaimed power onto others, and they will use it against you. Your fear of being alone will keep you in toxic dynamics. Your fear of being rejected will silence your voice. Your fear of being too much will convince you to be nothing at all. But you are not too much. You are the storm, the flame, the quiet truth, trembling in the throat of the world. And once you speak not with volume, but with conviction, everything begins to shift. Not because the world changed, but because you did. There is a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when something inside you begins to resist. A thought arises. What if I stopped, not in defiance? Not in bitterness, but in clarity. What if I stopped saying yes just to be liked? What if I stopped giving without boundaries, loving without self-honor, listening without being heard? What if I stopped being the one who holds the space, carries the emotional weight, sacrifices, silently, all while secretly longing to be seen? This question, once asked, cannot be unasked. It rattles through your bones like thunder through dry soil, because deep down you already know. You know that every time you silence yourself, you reinforce a silent agreement that says, I am not worthy of being heard. You know that every time you stay in a room where your soul is being suffocated, you are telling yourself, I deserve this. But Jung reminds us that the unconscious is not just a reservoir of pain, it is also the keeper of potential. Every act of repression contains within it the seed of liberation. The part of you that swallowed its voice has power waiting to be reclaimed. The part of you that has always been too polite to confront, too scared to upset, too conditioned to rebel. That part is your gatekeeper, your shadow. And it has been waiting, not to destroy your life, but to give it back to you. But reclaiming your life does not start with shouting. It starts with noticing. Pay attention to the small betrayals, the moments you say sure when your body is screaming no. The invitations you accept out of guilt. The favors you do hoping for approval. The texts you send just to keep the connection alive. These are not neutral choices. They are energetic signatures of a soul trying to survive through appeasement. And each time you do it, you teach your nervous system that your truth is dangerous. That being liked is safer than being whole. That silence is more valuable than authenticity. But here's the paradox. The more you choose to be liked, the less you are respected. Because those who live in self-abandonment emit a frequency, one that tells the world, I will tolerate disrespect if it means I won't be alone. And that frequency attracts exactly what it signals. You don't draw in cruelty because you deserve it. You draw it because on some level it matches the tone you've set within. The tone of unworthiness, the tone of invisibility. Jung knew that external reality mirrors internal alignment. Your relationships, your patterns, the way people respond to you, it's not random. It's a projection of your psychic posture. Change that posture and everything begins to recalibrate. But changing your inner posture requires grief. Grief for the person you pretended to be. The agreeable one, the adaptable one, the fixer, the pleaser, the rescuer. Grieve her. Grieve him. Because that version of you was not false, it was just incomplete. It was a strategy, a survival mechanism, a beautifully tragic attempt to belong in a world that taught you to hide your truth. But you are not here to survive others' expectations. You are here to become indivisible, whole, integrated sovereign. That means you no longer owe anyone a performance of perfection. You're allowed to be messy, angry, disappointed, tired, unproductive, unapologetic. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to stop showing up for people who do not show up for you. You're allowed to walk away not as punishment, but as protection. You're allowed to let the tower fall if the foundation was built on self-betrayal. Because anything that costs you your dignity is too expensive. Anything that asks you to shrink is not a home. And anything that requires your silence to survive will never offer you real love. Respect begins with this understanding that your needs are not negotiable, your worth is not conditional, and your time is not infinite. You owe no one the version of you that exists only to keep others comfortable. You will be tested. Make no mistake. The moment you begin to choose yourself, the universe will respond. Not with ease, but with friction. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will try to guilt you back into submission. They will call you difficult, cold, selfish, dramatic. Let them. Their discomfort is not your burden. Their resistance is a sign that your energy is shifting. You are no longer accessible in the same way. You are no longer participating in the old dance. And they don't know what to do with that. It's not your job to teach them. It's your job to stay true to the new rhythm of your soul. Jung taught that the path of individuation is not walked in the light of certainty. It is carved in the darkness of confusion, resistance, and solitude. You will feel lost at times. You will question everything. You will miss the comfort of being needed, even if that need came from being used. But every time you say no when you used to say yes, you rewrite your story. Every time you disappoint someone in order to stay loyal to your truth, you restore your inner authority. Every time you leave a space that dishonors you, you come closer to a life that will nourish you. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, the world begins to reflect back a different version of you, one who is not just respected, but unshakably rooted in their own self-worth. And then one day, without fanfare, you will notice the shift. You'll walk into a room and no longer scan for approval. You'll speak, and your voice will not tremble. You'll look in the mirror and see not a project to fix, but a presence to revere. You will no longer shrink in the presence of others' expectations. You will no longer explain your no or apologize for your boundaries or barter your authenticity for scraps of love. You will be grounded, not guarded, soft but not submissive, open but not available to exploitation. And people will notice. They will feel the difference in your energy, the way you hold yourself, the clarity in your gaze, the stillness in your yes, the finality in your no. Some will be drawn to it, others will fall away. Let both happen. You're not here to be everything to everyone. You're here to be true. And truth is not always popular. It is not always palatable, but it is always magnetic, always sovereign, always enough. You will no longer wonder why they don't respect you, because you will have become someone who no longer needs their respect to validate your own. The war will be over. Not because the world changed, but because you did. There's a hidden force, vast and ancient, operating behind your decisions, one that shapes your self-perception long before you even speak. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And it is not a monster hiding beneath your bed. It is the part of you that you were taught not to be. It is the anger you weren't allowed to express, the boundaries you weren't permitted to draw, the power you were told was dangerous, the voice you learned to silence. These parts of you didn't disappear, they went underground. They became whispers in the back of your mind. The flinch when you try to speak your truth, the guilt that rises when you take up space, the discomfort that floods your body when you set a boundary. And because they remain unseen, they begin to rule your life from below. They dictate what you tolerate, who you attract, what you believe you're worth, and most of all, how much self-respect you allow yourself to hold. The shadow does not hate you. It longs for you. It holds your power, your fierceness, your wholeness. But you were trained to fear it, to equate your depth with danger, your intensity with instability, your self-protection with selfishness. So now, when someone mistreats you, you freeze. When someone disrespects you, you minimize. When someone pushes your limit, you bend. Not because you're weak, but because the part of you that knows how to roar was exiled long ago. You learn to survive by being small. But survival is not the same as sovereignty. And until you reclaim the shadow, you will keep confusing love with obedience, safety with silence, peace with submission. Look around your life. What have you normalized that is actually intolerable? The jokes that cut you like knives, but you laugh at anyway. The constant reaching for people who never reach back. The work environments that deplete your soul. The relationships where you must contort to be acceptable. These are not isolated events. They are patterns, and patterns do not form randomly. They emerge from the architecture of your unconscious. From the silent beliefs you inherited long ago. I must be quiet to be loved. I must never show anger. I must give to earn my place. I must endure to be respected. But these beliefs are not truths. They are survival codes, and they are outdated. What kept you safe as a child is now suffocating you as an adult. The shadow still lives by those old laws, and so you betray yourself before anyone else can. You abandon your needs before they become inconvenient. You deny your pain before it threatens someone's comfort. You censor your truth before it risks rejection. This is how the shadow works. It anticipates punishment and neutralizes you before others get the chance. And because it's so seamless, so deeply wired, you think this is just who you are. But it's not. It's who you became to protect yourself. And now it's time to evolve. Because the longer you live in repression, the more the shadow punishes you, not with cruelty, but with a life that reflects your invisibility. Your job, your friends, your romantic partners, they all begin to mirror the dynamic you hold within one where you do not matter. One where you exist only in relation to others' needs. One where your power is a threat and your silence is a virtue. But this is not who you were meant to be. You are meant to embody the full spectrum of your being, the light and the dark, the tenderness and the fire, the giving and the saying no more. You are meant to speak with clarity, Move with purpose and love without needing to shrink first. And that begins by facing what you've been avoiding: your rage, your sadness, your jealousy, your need, your desire, your disappointment. All the emotions you've shoved into the cellar of your psyche because they didn't fit the image of the good one. But here's what Jung taught us: what you do not own owns you. What you refuse to see controls your life from the shadows. And so long as you deny your rightful anger, you will stay passive. So long as you avoid your boundaries, you will remain exploited. So long as you reject your inner fire, you will freeze in moments that require heat. Repression does not make you more spiritual. It makes you smaller. And no one respects smallness that comes from fear. True respect, the kind that others feel without you saying a word, is born from integration, from wholeness, from the alignment between your inner world and your outer expression. You don't earn it by being agreeable. You embody it by being real. Raw, unapologetic, rooted. Not loud, not aggressive, but immovable. When your no comes from a place of self-honor, it doesn't need to be explained. When your boundaries are rooted in truth, they become sacred. And when your energy is no longer available for exploitation, the world adjusts. But here is where many fall back in the loneliness that follows awakening. When you start honoring your shadow, you may feel the void. The space once filled by people who only knew the compliant version of you begins to empty. And in that emptiness, you may question everything. You may wonder if you've made a mistake, if you've become too harsh, too selfish, too distant. That's the shadow's final illusion to lure you back into the comfort of betrayal. Don't fall for it. That ache is not abandonment. It is alignment realigning. You are not losing your life. You are shedding the false one, the one built on appeasement, on performance, on conditional belonging. And the grief you feel is sacred. It is the grief of a soul that is no longer willing to live on its knees. Let it break you. Let it empty you. Let it cleanse every last remnant of your addiction to approval. Because on the other side of that grief is power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that simply walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere. The kind that says without words, I do not fear being alone because I am finally with myself. This is the rebirth that integration offers. You stop chasing love. You start radiating it. You stop begging for respect. You become the embodiment of it, and then everything around you begins to reflect that wholeness. Not immediately, not perfectly, but undeniably. Because energy never lies. And once your energy becomes rooted in truth, those who cannot meet you, they will fall away, not as punishment, but as purification. This is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice, a conscious remembering, 1,000 small choices to remain loyal to yourself in a world that rewards loyalty to everything but. And some days you will falter. Some days the old self will creep back in, smiling too much, apologizing too fast, giving without pause. That's okay. Don't shame her. Don't shame him. That version of you kept you alive. Thank them. And then return to your center, your root, your truth. Breathe. Stand. Speak. Withdraw your energy from what drains you. Offer it only to what honors you. And watch as slowly, mysteriously, beautifully the world begins to respond in kind. Not because you demanded it, but because you have become undeniable. There is a silence that comes after the storm, not the silence of defeat, but the stillness of something ancient returning home. After the grief, the shadow work. The shedding comes a terrifying yet sacred space emptiness. Not the kind that devours you, but the kind that exposes how much of your identity was built on the gaze of others. When you begin to respect yourself truly deeply, you will not feel empowered at first. You will feel alone. Because the old life, the old roles, the old relationships were tethered to the version of you that did not yet know your worth. And when you shift your frequency, everything that fed off your former absence begins to fall away. You start to see clearly who only loved you when you were silent, who only needed you when you were endlessly available, who only praised you when you didn't challenge them. And the clarity is sharp. It cuts through illusions you held for years, even decades. But it is also clean, because with it comes truth, And truth, though, it wounds, never poisons. It heals, it liberates. But the liberation comes at a cost, and that cost is emotional detachment from the system that used your compliance as currency. You begin to recognize just how often you traded authenticity for belonging. You see how often you abandoned your intuition just to maintain peace. You realize that the fear of being alone was never about solitude. It was about the belief that without others you had no identity. And this is where the soul is asked to mature. This is where you stop chasing connections that require you to betray yourself to sustain them. This is where you choose the sacred discomfort of authenticity over the fleeting comfort of being liked. Jung understood that individuation was not a social process, it was a solitary one. You cannot become whole while still depending on others to reflect your worth. Wholeness means this: you look into the mirror of your own solitude and no longer flinch. You begin to see not a lack, but a presence, a quiet, radiant presence that asks nothing from the world except to be honored. And once you feel that even for a moment something irreversible happens, you stop seeking, not because you've given up, but because you've arrived. The hunger to prove, to fix, to be chosen, it dissolves. And what takes its place is power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that simply is. A presence, a gravitational field. You walk differently, speak less, but every word is anchored. Every step is a declaration, and others feel it, even those who cannot name it. You are no longer someone they can manipulate, flatter, guilt, or bend. Not because you became hardened, but because you became real, whole, alive. And in your aliveness, others are forced to confront their own absence. Some will flee, others will follow, but none will ignore you. This is when you realize that being alone was never the punishment, it was the sanctuary. It was the womb from which the true self could finally emerge. And you begin to distinguish between the voices that come from love and the ones that come from lack. You no longer react to every opinion, every rejection, every praise, because you are no longer starving. Respect once sought in the faces of others is now a posture you carry in your spine, a silence in your presence, a fire behind your calm. You no longer need to scream your worth, defend your dignity, or convince the world to treat you well. You are the evidence, you are the standard, and those who cannot meet it will not have access to your energy. This is not arrogance, it is spiritual hygiene, it is emotional sovereignty, it is the result of burning every mask that kept you small. And yes, you will mourn the masks. You will miss the old roles. You will remember the times when pleasing others gave you a fleeting sense of safety. But now you understand safety bought with self-betrayal is not safety. It is captivity, and you were never meant to live in a cage made of politeness, people-pleasing, and emotional compromise. You were born for freedom, and freedom requires discipline, the discipline to choose solitude over self-abandonment, truth over harmony, and dignity over approval. Still, you are human. You will slip. You will have days when the old instincts return, when you reach out seeking comfort from someone who once made you feel small, when you over-explain your no, when you suppress a truth to avoid tension. Do not shame yourself. This path is not linear. This awakening is not a straight line. But each time you return to your center, each time you say, "This doesn't feel like self-respect," and choose differently, you are weaving a new reality. Not just for yourself, but for those who watch you. Because energy is contagious. Your integrity becomes a mirror. Your self-respect becomes a lighthouse. And others will be drawn, not to your perfection, but to your embodiment. Because you remind them of what they forgot, that it is possible to live without shrinking, that it is possible to love without losing yourself, that it is possible to be powerful and gentle, whole and human-grounded and free. You become the living proof that transformation is not only real, it is inevitable when truth is honored over comfort. And this truth, once embodied, cannot be stolen, mocked, or diluted. It lives in you now, in your tone, your gaze, your stillness, your presence. And from that place, you no longer ask for respect. You are respect. You no longer perform worthiness. You are worthy. And the world, seeing this, will either rise to meet you or fall away in reverence. And so, here you are standing at the edge of everything you've ever known about yourself. No longer the performer, no longer the martyr, no longer the invisible presence that served the needs of others while starving your own soul. What lies before you now is not certainty, but authenticity. Not perfection, but presence. And not the illusion of control, but the raw, untamed experience of becoming. Because that's what respect truly is, not something handed to you by others, but something you forge in the fire of self-recognition. You begin to realize that people treat you as you treat yourself, not just in words, but in energy posture, boundary, and choice. Every time you said yes when your truth screamed no, you taught the world to override you. Every time you smiled through the disrespect, you carved your own erasure into the architecture of your life. Every time you tolerated mistreatment to avoid being alone, you whispered to the universe, "I will pay for connection with my dignity." But not anymore. That version of you, the one who bartered self-worth for temporary affection, is gone. Not destroyed, not hated, but integrated. Held, honored, understood. And in their place stands a new force, not someone harder, but someone whole. Someone who knows the difference between kindness and compliance, between compassion and self-sacrifice, between love and addiction. You have remembered what the world wanted you to forget, that you are always allowed to take up space, speak your truth, guard your heart, and walk away from anything that did not honor the divinity of your being. And now when someone interrupts you, you do not shrink, you pause and hold your ground. When someone mocks your depth, you do not laugh along. You look them in the eyes and say, "This isn't funny." When someone disappears after draining your energy, you do not chase you, thank the universe for the lesson, and close the door. Because your time is sacred now. Your presence is sacred now. Your peace is not up for negotiation. And those who cannot meet you where you've risen will find themselves outside the gates of your new life, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Not out of revenge, but out of reverence for the person you are becoming. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege comes with a cost, the death of your false selves. The loss of illusions, the heartbreak of watching people fall away who only knew how to love you when you were disappearing for them. But you do not mourn that loss forever because you begin to see what you gain. You begin to see who you are without the noise, the mask, the conditioning. You begin to feel your center, your root, your essence, and it is not fragile, it is not needy, it is not desperate to be chosen, it is steady, grounded, unapologetically alive. And when you move from that place, you move with quiet power. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to explain your worth. Your being becomes enough. Your boundaries become sacred architecture, and those who respect themselves will see you, recognize you, and rise with you. Because when you respect yourself, you don't just shift your own life. You create a ripple in the field of human consciousness. You give others permission to do the same. You become the mirror that reflects their own unclaimed power. You become the invitation they've been waiting for, the invitation to stop performing, to stop shrinking, to stop pretending that playing small is love. Your life becomes a living transmission of what is possible when truth is prioritized over comfort, when solitude is chosen over submission, when the shadow is integrated rather than feared. And in that transmission, you begin to attract differently. Not faster, not louder, but truer. Your relationships take on a different frequency. The ones built on transaction fall away. The ones rooted in mutual recognition begin to emerge. And for the first time, you find yourself surrounded by people who don't need you to abandon yourself to feel safe around you. For the first time, you can speak and not be interrupted, feel and not be mocked, say no and still be loved. Not because the world changed, but because you did. And you begin to understand what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate." This presence, this integrity, this alignment, this is what happens when the unconscious becomes conscious. This is what happens when you break the cycle. And even now, if the old voice rises, the one that says, "You're being too much, you'll lose everyone, who do you think you are?" you smile gently. Not because the voice has vanished, but because you know now it is not truth. It is a ghost, an echo, a remnant of a self who lived in fear. And you no longer live there. You no longer seek safety in obedience. You no longer seek love through self-abandonment. You have crossed the threshold. You have become someone your past self never imagined was possible. Someone who does not ask for respect, but commands it simply by existing. And this power, it's not loud, it's not sharp, it's not external. It lives in your stillness. It lives in your choices. It lives in the way you refuse to betray yourself for anyone ever again. That is what changes everything. That is the shift the world cannot ignore, because your energy is no longer fragmented. It is focused. It is clean. It is whole. And from this place, you do not attract love out of hunger. You share love from overflow. You do not demand reverence. You embody it. So let this be your vow, whispered not to the world, but to the deepest part of you. That from this moment forward, you will no longer explain your boundaries, apologize for your presence, or negotiate your worth. That you will no longer keep yourself small, to be loved, or silent to be safe. That you will no longer be the one who disappears, so others can shine. Because your light is not a threat. Your truth is not a burden. Your soul is not too much. You are enough. And the world will learn how to treat you by watching how you treat yourself. So stand up. Speak. Breathe. Honor the one within you who waited so long to be chosen. And choose them now. Choose them every day. Not because others finally see you, but because you finally do. That is the beginning of everything. And that is where respect becomes inevitable. There are truths buried so deep in the body, the mind will spend a lifetime chasing echoes of them. You were born into this world, not only with a name and a face, but with a code that hums quietly beneath your skin. A silent rhythm that speaks not in words, but in impulses, reactions, and longings you never chose. That code is your blood, and yet what if it is more than biology? What if your blood type is not only a fact of physiology, but a fingerprint of your psyche? A mythic mirror from the unconscious, carrying the archetype of who you are, meant to become. You think you are defined by your past, your choices, your environment. But Carl Jung once whispered between the lines, "The soul is ancient, and the body is its house of memory. The blood is its sacred ink. Every drop of you carries symbols older than the ego instructions you were not taught, but born knowing if only you dared to feel them." A person with type O may walk through the world with the pulse of the warrior, always seeking to protect, to lead, to conquer their own chaos, not by taming it, but by learning to dance inside it. Not because they were told to, but because their very marrow burns with ancient instinct. They feel before they think, act before they analyze. And sometimes they are misunderstood, called aggressive or dominant, when in truth they are simply closer to the fire. The fire that shaped the world when there were no walls, only survival. But how many warriors are dying quietly now, mistaking their sacred power for a flaw? How many type O's have been shamed for the very intensity that makes them who they are? What they call too much is exactly what this dying world needs. Heart-fire direction. And yet the wound of the warrior is loneliness. Because even a blood that burns red-hot longs for softness, Even a sword longs to be held by something that doesn't fear its edge. And perhaps that softness arrives in the type A, the sacred mediator. The sensitive heart who hears the unspoken, who bleeds for peace in a world that rewards only noise. They are the stewards of harmony, often lost in the pain of others, forgetting they were born whole before they were broken into pieces to soothe everyone else. Jung would call them a vessel for the anima. The feminine force not as gender, but as energy, receptive, intuitive, life-giving. Type A walks quietly into a room and feels the weight of others' ghosts before a single word is spoken, but they rarely speak of their own. They've been trained to please to keep the water still even as they drown in it. The wound of type A is invisibility. But in their silence lives a sacred truth. The ones who feel the most are the ones who are told they are too sensitive. As if sensitivity isn't a superpower. As if their softness isn't the very medicine the world forgot how to taste. But the world doesn't just need fire and water. It needs the winds of the type B, the seeker, the dreamer, the soul who cannot be contained by rules, categories, or expectations. They are the archetype of the trickster and the sage. One moment wild with laughter, the next lost in the folds of a thought no one else can follow. B is not here to follow. B is here to reveal, to provoke, to unmask. They carry the shadow of individuality, the refusal to conform, not because they hate the world, but because they see too clearly how most of it is asleep. And sometimes in their freedom, they are labeled selfish, flaky, strange. But those are words used by those who fear the mirror. B holds up the mirror that asks, "Are you truly alive, or just surviving?" The wound of B is disconnection. But their gift is awakening. They remind us that life isn't meant to be endured. It's meant to be felt, explored, even when it breaks you, especially then. And in the space between all these energies stands the rarest of all, type AB. The mystic. The alchemical blend, neither entirely fire nor water, earth or air, but the space between. The bridge between extremes. The paradox that makes no sense to the rational mind, but sings in symbols and dreams. AB is the archetype of the self, Jung's final destination in the journey of individuation, the merging of opposites, the collapse of duality. They carry within them the quiet storm, the urge to be everything and nothing, to dissolve into mystery, and yet hold enough form to lead others through it. AB sees both sides, feels both lives, and so they often feel torn, misunderstood, or like they don't belong anywhere. But this not belonging is not a curse, it is initiation. They were never meant to fit in. They were meant to stand at the crossroads, guiding others toward wholeness, toward the center, toward the soul. But what if this isn't only about blood? What if the blood is simply the veil, the metaphor the body wears to hint at the unseen truth that you were born not blank but encoded, that your longings are not accidents, that your repeated patterns, the ones you fight, deny, suppress, are not flaws but fragments of a myth you've forgotten you were meant to live. Jung said the unconscious will drag you by the throat until you make it conscious. And maybe your blood is one of the first ways it calls you, not as superstition, not as science, but as symbol. Because when you understand the symbols inside you, you begin to understand the dream you were born to awaken in. You begin to forgive yourself for all the things you were never meant to be. You begin to honor the ones you always were, even in silence. Because the soul speaks in patterns, and the blood remembers everything. There is an ancient grief woven into the very strands of our DNA. A grief that has no name, only sensation. It shows up when we betray our own nature to appease another. When we silence our fire to make others comfortable. When we overthink our truth because someone told us long ago that our instincts could not be trusted. Jung knew this grief. He saw it in the fragmented dreams of his patients, in the quiet breakdowns of those who seemed perfectly fine. He named it the split between the persona and the self, between the mask we wear to survive and the being we are destined to become. And the more we cling to that mask, the louder the blood becomes. It pulses, it aches, it revolts. It does not care how polite we are, how successful, how composed. The blood remembers who we were before we agreed to forget. You feel it, don't you? That tension. That subtle exhaustion of pretending, of adjusting your shape for spaces that were never meant to hold your truth. You were born with a type, yes, but more than that, you were born with a temperament, a myth, a longing. And while society tells you to be normal, the soul demands that you be whole. Blood type is only one key, not a cage. It hints at what you came here to balance, what you instinctively know. But in the unconscious, there are no neat categories. There are only energies asking to be felt: fire and water, chaos and order, spirit and flesh. All of them waiting to be integrated. All of them asking you to stop running and sit with what you are. What you are is not just a person. You are a tension between opposites, a living paradox. The body may be made of elements, but the self is born of myth. And the closer you get to this truth, the less interested you become in pleasing anyone. Something ancient stirs inside you, not rebellion, but remembrance. You begin to feel the sacred rhythm beneath your behaviors, the part of you that always knew it didn't belong in the shallow end of life. And suddenly, all the suffering begins to make sense. You weren't broken. You were being initiated. Your sensitivity, your intensity, your silence, all of it was part of your design. But it's terrifying to believe that. Because once you realize your blueprint was never wrong, you have no one left to blame. That's when the real work begins. Because beneath the surface of your blood is the shadow, the parts of you were told to hide. The aggression, the wildness, the yearning to be seen, the hunger to be free. The shame you were taught to swallow before you even understood it. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. And your blood is soaked in all the unconscious choices you inherited. From your ancestors, from the collective, from every moment you said yes when your soul whispered no. But here's the sacred truth. Your bloodline is not your destiny. It is your invitation, and you are not here to repeat it. You are here to redeem it. If you listen closely, your body is always speaking. Not in words, but in symbols. Headaches, fatigue, restlessness. That ache in your chest you can't explain. That emptiness after achieving something you were told would complete you. These are not failures. They are messages, callings, signals from the self asking you to return to what you abandoned to survive. You can't think your way back. You have to feel. You have to descend into the belly of your instincts, into the mud of your emotions, into the mirror of your relationships where every trigger is a map, every wound is a compass, and every attraction is a clue. Especially the ones that hurt, especially the ones that don't make sense. Because your blood seeks what your ego resists. If you are type O, you may find yourself drawn to peacekeepers. Not because you are weak, but because your fire is looking for water. If you are type A, you may be magnetized by rebels. Not because they are safe, but because they wake up the part of you that has been asleep. If you are type B, you may attract both lovers and enemies who try to tether you. Because freedom terrifies those who've never tasted it. And if you are type AB, you may find yourself endlessly mirrored, endlessly misunderstood because people project their unhealed opposites onto you. You become a canvas for everyone else's forgotten parts. But this is not a punishment. It is your gift. You are the invitation for others to remember what they buried to be accepted. But first, you must accept yourself. Not the curated version, not the good child, not the polite employee, not the attractive mask. The real you, the blood-stained, tear-drenched, half-awake, still healing you, the one who wants to scream sometimes, the one who still dreams in colors they've never seen, the one who wonders if they're too much and secretly fears they are not enough. That you, not the version you've performed. That's the self Jung pointed to, the one that rises when the persona dies, the one that whispers when the world goes quiet. The one that always knew. So ask yourself, What in me have I been afraid to feel? What does my blood remember that I have forgotten? What if my suffering was not punishment but passage? What if the pain was a portal? What if I am not here to be liked, but to be whole? Because wholeness is not perfection. Wholeness is integration. Wholeness is when your blood stops fighting your soul and starts dancing with it. The moment you begin listening to what moves beneath your own surface, the entire architecture of your life begins to tremble. That tremble is not fear. It is truth awakening in the bones. The unraveling of the script you were handed but never authored. The realization that you were never meant to be a copy. You are meant to be a revelation. Your blood does not lie. It carries the wisdom of every ancestor who survived, who suffered, who endured the unbearable so you could stand here now, confused perhaps, but alive. And that aliveness is sacred. It means you still have a choice. A choice to stop betraying what is real inside you for the sake of approval that has never satisfied your soul. Jung called this the path of individuation, but make no mistake, it is not a path of comfort. It is the road of fire, of contradiction, of death and rebirth. Because before you can become yourself, the false selves must die. The good child, the achiever, the pleaser, the cynic, the one who numbed their joy just to survive in a world that punishes aliveness. These masks are not evil. They are adaptations. They are the armor we wore when the world taught us that truth was dangerous. But the armor that once protected us now suffocates us, and your blood knows it. That is why you feel restless in safe places. That is why you sabotage what is good. That is why you crave intensity even if it burns you. You are not broken, you are being summoned, not by the world, but by the deeper intelligence within you that remembers who you were before the world taught you to forget. This is the shadow rising not to destroy you, but to integrate you. You see the shadow of is not the enemy. It is the unlived life. It is every instinct you buried in the name of being good. Every desire you denied because it didn't fit the narrative. Every roar you swallowed. Every hunger you turned against yourself, and the deeper tragedy you were praised for it. You were called strong for suppressing your tears, mature for dismissing your anger, wise for accepting what wounded you, but Jung knew the truth. What you suppress does not disappear. It waits, in the body, in the blood, in the dreams that disturb your sleep, and the relationships that break your heart. It waits, not to punish, but to return you to yourself. Because healing is not about becoming better. Healing is about becoming whole. And to be whole, you must reclaim every part of you, especially the ones you were taught to fear. Your aggression is not dangerous. It is your boundary. Your grief is not weakness. It is your depth. Your rage is not madness. It is your signal. Your desire is not shameful. It is your compass. Your blood knows these truths. But the mind resists. The mind clings to identity, to structure, to certainty. And yet the soul, the self, cares nothing for certainty. It craves only freedom, and freedom begins where self-deception ends. That is the cost of awakening. You must lose the version of yourself that made others comfortable so you can meet the version that makes you feel alive. And that version does not live in the image. It lives in the marrow, in the breath between your thoughts, in the silence beneath your story, in the ache that won't go away no matter how much you distract yourself. That ache is not a flaw. It is a calling. It is your body remembering its own truth that you are not here to perform. You are here to embody, not to chase worthiness, but to remember you were born with it. So, look at your life. Not through the lens of success or failure, but through the lens of alignment. What are you doing that drains your soul? Who are you pretending to be to feel loved? What dream did you abandon because it didn't make sense? What voice inside you silenced for the sake of peace? And what if your blood, your very chemistry, is rejecting the life you've built on betrayal? That is not illness. That is initiation. Your anxiety, it may be the part of you that knows you're not meant to stay where you are. Your depression, it may be your soul refusing to invest energy in a false identity. Your fatigue, it may be the exhaustion of carrying a mask that was never yours to wear. Your addictions, They may be your attempt to escape the truth that you are not living your truth. This is not blame. This is a mirror. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Your blood, the oldest part of you, is that darkness. It is your forgotten wisdom. It is your inner archetype trying to awaken. And when you finally turn toward it instead of away, when you stop pathologizing what you feel and start honoring it, that is when everything begins to change. That is when you stop surviving and begin living. That is when the fire in your veins no longer burns you, it guides you. And in that moment, the moment you stop running, stop pretending, stop apologizing for the way your soul was wired, you come face to face with something terrifyingly sacred, your power. Not the power they sell you in books or self-help seminars, not the power of dominance or control, but the raw, trembling power of self-possession. The power of looking in the mirror and not flinching. The power of standing in your blood, in your ache, in your desire, and claiming it all as holy. Jung knew that true transformation does not begin with light. It begins with descent. With walking willingly into the cave of the unconscious and meeting the monsters you've spent your whole life avoiding, only to realize they are fragments of your own soul waiting to be loved back into wholeness. Because the unconscious doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to complete you, and your blood is the bridge. It connects the body to the dream, the animal to the angel, the instinct to the insight. It carries not just oxygen, but memory. Not just cells, but symbols. And when you stop pathologizing your patterns and start deciphering them, you begin to see the mythic story unfolding through your very biology. You begin to see how the anger was never just anger, it was your boundary being violated. The anxiety was never weakness, it was your soul screaming for space. The depression wasn't failure, it was your psyche grieving the death of your false self. Everything inside you has meaning. You are not random. You are myth in motion. And what if your blood type is not just a medical label, but a metaphor? What if type O teaches you to lead because your soul remembers battle? What if type A calls you to feel deeply because your essence is rooted in empathy? What if type B pulls you into rebellion because your truth cannot be domesticated? What if type AB whispers in riddles because you were born to dissolve polarity? These are not destinies, they are doors. Doors into your deeper nature. And when you enter, you don't find answers. You find responsibility. The responsibility to honor what you are instead of shaming it. The responsibility to stop outsourcing your worth. To stop betraying your intuition. To stop waiting for permission to be whole. No one is coming to save you. But something inside you is trying to awaken, and the longer you ignore it, the more your life will ache. Jung warned us, the soul will not be silenced. If it cannot speak through dreams, it will speak through symptoms. If not through symptoms, through relationships, through chaos, through breakdown, not as punishment, but as initiation, because the self does not want you to be comfortable. It wants you to be real. It wants you to be integrated. To walk the earth, not as a reaction, but as a revelation. That is the sacred demand of individuation, that you risk shedding every borrowed identity for the wild, trembling truth of your own becoming. And when you do, when you allow yourself to feel the pulse of your blood, not as noise but as guidance, you begin to move differently. You no longer chase people who cannot meet you. You no longer apologize for your depth. You no longer dilute your desires to fit into containers that were never built for you. You begin to see your life not as a series of events, but as a ritual. Every heartbreak a rite of passage, every betrayal a mirror, every longing a map, and the body. Your body becomes the temple where this sacred remembering unfolds. Because blood is not just blood, it is ink for a story that was written before you were born. A story your ego forgot, but your soul remembers. A story that begins with a single question. Will you finally believe what your blood has been trying to tell you? Will you stop suppressing what aches to rise? Will you walk into the fire, not to be burned, but to be forged? You don't need another answer. You need to feel the truth already moving through your veins. It's not out there. It never was. It's in your breath, your pulse, your pain. It's in your blood. And your blood has never lied to you. The closer you come to your blood, the less noise you need. The more clearly you feel the voice that was always there beneath the surface, not shouting, not begging, just waiting. Your entire life you've been taught to look outside, to seek validation, instruction, identity. But Jung knew nothing real ever comes from the outside. It only mirrors what's already stirring within. The therapist does not heal you. The book does not save you. The lover does not complete you. They simply awaken the dormant. And your blood has always been awake. It is your compass, your covenant, your contract with life. The final betrayal is pretending you cannot hear it. And it speaks in sensation. It speaks when you are overwhelmed in a room full of noise that used to thrill you. When your body recoils from situations your mind is still trying to justify. When your heart races near people who say the right words but vibrate in falsehood. It speaks in exhaustion, in nausea, in the tension that clings to your muscles like grief. You say you're tired, but what if you're not tired? What if you're misaligned, living in ways that contradict your essence? And your blood, loyal only to your truth, can no longer sustain the lie. The lie that your pain makes you unworthy. The lie that silence means weakness. The lie that sensitivity is a flaw. The lie that being hard makes you powerful. You do not need to become someone else. You need to become everything you were taught to be and return to the one you were before you were named. Your blood knows the way, because it is not just a part of you, it is you. It is where the archetypes live, where the inner child still breathes, where the mother wound still pulses, where the shadow dances in dream time, where your ancestors still weep, still whisper, still wait for you to break the cycle they could not. But make no mistake, this work will cost you. It will cost you your comfort, your illusions, the people who only loved you when you performed. It will cost you the identity that made you feel safe. But what you gain is not comfort, it is clarity. What you receive is not certainty, it is sovereignty. The kind of sovereignty that comes only when you are no longer seduced by performance or paralyzed by rejection. When you know who you are in your blood, rejection becomes redirection. Failure becomes refinement. Loneliness becomes sacred solitude, and pain becomes prophecy. This is the gift of individuation, not perfection, not control, but the sacred intimacy of knowing your own nature, of bowing to your own rhythm, of becoming the one thing the world cannot manipulate fully, fiercely yourself. And yes, they will misunderstand you. They will project onto you. They will label what they fear. But their misunderstanding is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to your own soul, to your own calling, to the symbols that rise in your dreams and the fire that never dies in your gut. You are not made to explain your blood. You are made to embody it. To live so honestly that your presence becomes a mirror, not of who others want to be, but of who they are still afraid to become. Because when you live from the truth of your blood, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. You simply are. And in your being, others begin to remember what they too buried. Your embodiment becomes their permission. Your fire lights the way through their darkness. Your silence holds space for their awakening. But none of that happens until you surrender to your own. So ask yourself again, what part of me have I buried to be loved? What does my blood crave that my mind resists? What would it mean to trust what I feel more than what I've been told? It would mean everything. Because the soul does not speak in logic. It speaks in longing. It speaks in tears you cannot explain, in dreams you cannot shake, in desires that return no matter how many times you kill them. It speaks in your blood, in the sacred ache that pulses when you touch your truth. So stop numbing, stop running, stop asking the world for answers it cannot give. Get quiet, get still, get inside your own skin. And listen, your blood has waited your entire life for this moment. The moment you finally remember, you were never lost. You were simply disconnected. And now you are coming home. And coming home is not a place, it is a return. A sacred descent into the body you've tried so hard to escape. Into the silence you've tried so hard to fill. Into the feelings you've tried so hard to numb. But now you understand, numbness is not peace, it's paralysis. Avoidance is not freedom, it's delay. You don't need more distractions. You don't need more performance. You need presence, real presence. The kind that comes only when you stop asking who you're supposed to be and finally feel who you already are. The kind that turns the body from a prison into a temple. The kind that sees the blood not as a biological accident, but as scripture. Because the blood has always known. It knew when you were 4 and you felt too much. When you stared at the stars and cried without knowing why. When you touched another human and felt their sadness ripple through your skin. It knew when you laughed so hard your body couldn't contain it. When you stood alone and it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like truth. Before they told you to be small, your blood moved like a storm of knowing. And all of your suffering since has been the soul's rebellion against forgetting. You were never meant to fit. You were meant to feel, to burn, to be the edge that cannot be dulled, to carry the archetype that the world doesn't yet understand but desperately needs. That is the tragedy of most people. They never come home. They die in the armor they were praised for. They live from the mask, never from the marrow. They die as persona, never as self. But that will not be your fate. Not if you're still listening. Not if this ache in your chest means something. Not if your body still reacts when the truth is spoken out loud. There is still time. There is still breath. There is still the sacred pulse of life inviting you back. Back to the dream you were born to live. Back to the fire they told you to smother. Back to the voice you silenced for too long. Back to the you that existed before the performance began. And the beauty is, you don't need to know what it looks like. You only need to say yes. Yes to the unraveling. Yes to the remembering. Yes to the darkness that will shape you and the light that will rise from your bones. Yes to the wild, holy grief of becoming. Because the road to wholeness is not paved in certainty. It is carved in blood. It is traced through wounds. It is sung in tears. And it is walked alone until you realize that the self was always walking beside you, waiting for you to stop, to turn, to face what you feared the most. Not your shadow, not your wounds, but your own magnitude, the terrifying beauty of being exactly who you are. You are not broken. You are becoming. You are not late. You are right on time. You are not too much. You are the embodiment of a soul that refused to shrink. And now your blood sings. It sings not in language, but in knowing. It sings in the quiet, in the stillness after the storm, in the breath between your tears. And if you're listening closely, truly listening, you'll hear it. You were never meant to be understood. You were meant to be remembered. By yourself, by the stars, by the blood that carries the story of your becoming. And that story is sacred. Write it, live it, bleed it, and never forget your soul is older than this world. But your blood is your permission to walk through it with fire in your chest and silence in your knowing. You are not your pain. You are not your past. You are not your persona. You are the self. And the self, once awakened, cannot be undone.
Jung once suggested that what we repress in ourselves becomes the very weapon others can use against us. And when an empath finally does this one thing, it doesn't just free them, it ignites the darkest, most uncontainable side of a narcissist. The empath's act, so deceptively simple, is not vengeance. It is sovereignty. And sovereignty, to a narcissist, is like sunlight to a creature of the abyss. Today, I'll take you inside this forbidden territory where the empath's awakening collides with the narcissist's hunger for control. You will walk the path Jung outlined the encounter with shadow, the collapse of persona, the battle for the soul. This is not theory. It is lived fire. Imagine an empath, soft-voiced, carrying wounds as if they were jewels. They absorb what others cannot bear. They make themselves into the vessel for unspoken rage, unprocessed shame, abandoned sorrow. To the narcissist, this sensitivity is not kindness, it is supply. It is fuel. It is proof that they can shape another soul into a mirror of their own fractured self. But then one night, one moment, the empath does the unthinkable. They stop explaining. They stop soothing. They stop orbiting around the narcissist's storm. It is not a violent exit, not even an argument. It is a withdrawal of psychic oxygen. The empath says without words, I will no longer carry what is not mine. And at that precise instant, something breaks open. Jung called this the enantiodromia, the reversal into its opposite. The narcissist, who thrived on being the unseen sun at the center of another's psyche, suddenly finds the world dark. The empath's silence, their refusal, their stepping out of role, it is unbearable. To the narcissist, it is annihilation. Carl Jung warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath, in reclaiming themselves, has made darkness conscious. They have exposed the dependency hidden beneath the narcissist's grandiosity. For the narcissist, rage rises not because they lost love, but because they lost control. Picture it, the narcissist pacing, texting, accusing, pleading, all at once. Their voice laced with venom and desperation. The empath feels it in their bones, the full pressure of projection. Suddenly, the narcissist casts them as villain, traitor, destroyer. Jung would have said projection is the unconscious made flesh. The narcissist cannot face their own emptiness, so they paint it onto the empath. And here, yes, you feel the gravity of this moment. For maybe you too have been here, caught between the impulse to turn back, to soothe, to restore peace, and the deeper knowing that to return would be a slow self-erasure. The empath's act is not abandonment, it is individuation. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, separating from the collective expectations and roles we were forced to carry. When the empath stops feeding the narcissist's need, they take their first step toward the self, the true center, deeper than persona, stronger than shadow. Yet this awakening carries a cost. For every seed of freedom sown, there is a storm unleashed. The narcissist's darkest side emerges in retaliation smear campaigns, manipulative pleas, icy withdrawal, or volcanic rage. It is the unconscious fighting for survival. Still, hidden within the chaos is a revelation the empath has never been powerless. Their compassion, once weaponized against them, is revealed as alchemy. By withdrawing it, they do not destroy the narcissist, they reveal them. They force into daylight what has always lurked in shadow. And so the story begins not as a war between two people, but as a crucible. The empath stands at the threshold of transformation, carrying the unbearable weight of Jung's insight. The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. You, listening now, are standing at such a threshold. Do you carry what is not yours? Do you give oxygen to those who would rather drown you than face themselves? The journey has begun. The empath's refusal, their silence, their stepping back, it has awakened the darkest side of the narcissist, but it has also awakened the first glimmer of their own soul's sovereignty. When the empath withdraws their energy, the narcissist spirals. It is not merely the loss of attention, it is the collapse of an entire psychic scaffolding. Jung described the persona, the mask we wear before the world, as both necessary and fragile. The narcissist's persona is built of glass, a glittering facade of superiority, charm, and control. The empath, by stepping back, has thrown a stone without lifting a hand. The mask fractures, and beneath it writhes something the narcissist cannot bear to see: emptiness. The emptiness is ancient. It is the wound of the abandoned child, the unheard cry, the shamed vulnerability that once begged for love and was met with rejection. The narcissist built their fortress not out of strength, but out of terror. And when the empath ceases to feed the illusion, those walls tremble. What the empath triggers is not simply anger, it is primal panic. Imagine a patient Jung once wrote about a man whose arrogance was impenetrable, who dismissed all others as inferior. Yet in dreams he was pursued by a crying child, a figure he refused to face. Jung explained that the child was his own soul, split off, repressed, crying out through the unconscious. When the empath stops playing the part of caretaker, they force the narcissist toward this child, and the narcissist, unable to bear it, lashes out at the one who revealed it. You feel this now, don't you? The tightness in the chest, the memory of words weaponized against you, the look in someone's eyes when they realize they no longer owned your spirit. This is not a personal failure. It is the nature of projection. Jung called projection a splinter of the soul cast onto another. The narcissist cannot face their emptiness, so they make you the container of it. But here lies the empath's danger if you absorb the projection. You become what they accuse you of. You become cruel in your own eyes, selfish in your own story, guilty for daring to breathe freely. This is the trap. And yet the way through is not to defend, not to argue, not to explain. It is to return the splinter, to stand before the mirror and whisper, "This is not mine to carry." In this crucible, the empath undergoes their own initiation. Jung described individuation as a descent into the underworld of the psyche, a confrontation with shadow, before one can rise into wholeness. For the empath, the shadow is often their hidden anger, their buried boundaries, their unspoken no. They have lived as healers, absorbers, sacrificers. Their shadow is the part that refuses to sacrifice anymore. To awaken this shadow is terrifying. The empath has been conditioned to believe that saying no is cruelty, that stepping back is abandonment, that self-protection is betrayal. But in Jung's alchemy, the shadow carries gold. Within that dark refusal lies the seed of freedom. Think of it this way: the empath's silence is not empty. It is full of unseen fire. It says, "I will not be the parent to your child self. I will not be the scapegoat for your shame. I will not bleed so that you may feel whole." It is not hatred, it is self-birth. And the narcissist feels it as death. Jung wrote, "The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well." The empath has stepped through that door. The narcissist, refusing to enter, hurls every weapon to drag them back: guilt, rage, seduction, despair. But the empath's task is not to rescue the narcissist from their darkness. The task is to rescue themselves from the role of rescuer. Here, the empath must endure loneliness. For stepping away from the narcissist is not merely leaving a person, it is leaving an identity. The empath has defined themselves as the healer, the carrier, the one who can bear what others cannot. Without this, who are they? Jung warned that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This is the true abyss the empath faces, not the narcissist's rage, but their own unclaimed self. You, listening now, know this abyss, the silence after the storm, the hollow ache where purpose once lived, the questions that echo if I am not their savior. Who am I? If I am not needed, am I real? This is the psychological crucifixion, the death of the old self. But in Jung's vision, every crucifixion conceals a resurrection. The empath's resurrection begins in fragments. A night of undisturbed sleep, a laugh that rises without fear, a breath that feels unchained. These are not small things. They are signs that the self, the true center, not the wounded role, is awakening. The narcissist may rage, may beg, may disappear, but the empath has crossed a threshold. They have seen the truth that their energy is sacred, that their compassion, without boundaries, becomes a weapon turned against them. That sovereignty is not isolation, but integration. And here, in this integration, lies the most dangerous discovery of all, not for the empath, but for the narcissist. The empath has realized they were never weak. They were the alchemist all along, and their refusal is the transmutation of lead into gold. There is a moment subtle, almost imperceptible, when the empath recognizes that the narcissist's rage is no longer about them. It is a storm that belongs entirely to the narcissist's fractured inner world. Jung taught that every outer conflict is also an inner one, projected outward because the psyche cannot contain it. The empath, by stepping away, reveals this truth. They become a mirror the narcissist cannot shatter. But the mirror does not flatter. It does not reflect grandeur. It reflects absence. And absence, to the narcissist, is terror. This is why their darkest side emerges not when you fight them, but when you no longer play. Their tantrum is not the roar of a predator, it is the cry of a child who realizes their puppet has cut its strings. Jung once said that the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. For the narcissist, the empath is that meeting. They see in the empath the tenderness they lost, the vulnerability they buried, the innocence they disowned. When the empath withdraws, these qualities return like ghosts at the door, and ghosts terrify those who live in fortresses. Consider the dream of one of Jung's patients. A towering king in shining armor stood on a battlefield, commanding soldiers with thunderous authority. But when the dreamer looked closer, the armor was hollow, and inside there was only a frightened boy. Jung explained that the king was persona, the armor was defense, and the boy was the repressed self. The dreamer had built a kingdom out of emptiness. So too does the narcissist, and the empath, refusing to kneel, forces them to glimpse the boy within. For the empath, this recognition is both liberating and devastating. Liberating because it reveals the truth: the narcissist's cruelty was never a measure of the empath's worth, but of their own unhealed wound. Devastating because it dismantles the illusion that love alone could save them. You, listening now, may feel this contradiction within yourself. The ache of realizing that no amount of compassion can mend what someone refuses to face. The quiet devastation of knowing that love, which once felt holy, was consumed like fuel for another's emptiness. Yet within that ache lies the seed of clarity. You were never powerless. Your energy was always sacred. Here the empath begins their descent into what Jung called the shadow confrontation. For years, they have lived as light bearers, healers, givers. But every light casts a shadow. Their shadow is anger. Their shadow is the boundary they never dared to draw. Their shadow is the voice that says enough. At first, the empath resists. They fear becoming like the narcissist if they claim this shadow. They fear that saying no will turn them into the very cruelty they abhor. But Jung's alchemy teaches otherwise. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is unlived life. To integrate it is not to become cruel, but to become whole. Think of it as fire. In the narcissist's hands, fire burns and consumes. In the empath's hands, fire illuminates and warms. The difference is consciousness. To accept your shadow is to reclaim your fire. And so the empath begins the process Jung named individuation. No longer defined by the needs of others, they begin to discover their own center, the self, which Jung described as the totality of the whole psyche. This is not selfishness, it is sovereignty. To stand in one's own self is to no longer live as a reflection, but as a presence. But individuation is not a straight path upward. It is a spiral, descending into the unconscious, confronting archetypes, facing projections, before emerging renewed. The empath, leaving the narcissist's orbit, must face not only the narcissist's darkness, but their own longing to be needed. They must admit, I too sought identity in carrying another's wound. This confession is the turning point. For only when the empath sees their own hunger for validation, for purpose, for love can they free themselves from the cycle. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The empath, by naming their hunger, transforms fate into choice. The narcissist, meanwhile, spirals deeper into their own abyss. Without the empath's energy, their mask slips faster, their rage grows sharper, their despair more visible. They may attempt to lure the empath back with promises, with guilt, with threats. But these are not bridges, they are traps. And the empath, having glimpsed the truth, begins to see them for what they are. Here lies the paradox. By refusing to save the narcissist, the empath saves themselves. By saving themselves, they step into the archetype Jung believed to be humanity's highest calling, the self as healer, not through sacrifice, but through wholeness. You feel it now, the possibility of this wholeness within you, the realization that your boundaries are not walls, but gateways, that your refusal is not cruelty, but clarity, that your silence is not emptiness, but the sound of your soul awakening. And with this awakening, the empath begins to walk a path the narcissist cannot follow, a path not of control, but of integration, a path not of illusion, but of truth. There comes a silence after the storm. The empath, having withdrawn their light, feels the echo of emptiness. It is not just the absence of the narcissist's voice, it is the absence of the role that once defined their existence. For years, they were the healer, the absorber, the one who steadied chaos with quiet endurance. Now, without that role, the question burns, who am I? If not the rescuer. Jung called this stage the nigredo, the blackening, the descent into psychological night. It is the alchemical stage where old forms dissolve, where identity itself begins to disintegrate. The empath walks through this darkness, unsure, trembling, tempted to return to the familiar pain rather than face the void of the unknown. But Jung warned, there is no birth of consciousness without pain. This emptiness is not abandonment, it is gestation. Meanwhile, the narcissist reveals their darkest form. Deprived of the empath's supply, their rage mutates into obsession. They may stalk, smear, manipulate, or disappear into icy silence, only to return with new tactics. To the empath, it feels like a haunting. And indeed, it is. Jung wrote that what is repressed becomes autonomous, behaving like a spirit. The narcissist, unable to face their own shadow, sends it forth to possess others. But the empath no longer absorbs it. They have begun to recognize this is not mine. And each time they refuse to carry it, the spell weakens. This is where dreams often arrive. Jung's patients, in similar crucibles, dreamed of collapsing houses, floods, serpents, and crucifixions. These are symbols of the psyche restructuring itself, tearing down the old order to make space for the new. Imagine an empath dreams of standing in a burning house. The flames consume everything, the furniture, the walls, even their clothes. At first, they panic, but then they realize they are not burning. They are walking through fire, naked, unashamed. When they wake, they feel a strange clarity. Jung would interpret this as the dissolution of persona, the false self consumed so the true self may emerge. You, too, may have felt such dreams or symbols in waking life, a friendship ending, a job collapsing, an identity unraveling. It feels like loss, but it is initiation. The empath, stripped of false roles, is being reborn. Yet there is danger here. The narcissist senses the empath's rebirth and grows more desperate. They will accuse the empath of cruelty, of betrayal, of madness. They will paint themselves as victim and the empath as oppressor. This is projection at its peak. And if the empath doubts themselves, they may fall back into the old orbit. But Jung's wisdom offers a key. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To withstand the narcissist's accusations, the empath must cling to the inner whisper, "I am becoming who I am." This is where the shadow transforms. The empath's anger once feared becomes their guardian. The no they once repressed becomes their shield. Anger, integrated, is not destruction, it is boundary. It is the fire that keeps wolves from the door while the soul grows. And here the empath begins to see their own power not as sacrifice, but as creation. They realize my compassion is not infinite fuel for others. It is sacred water to be poured where growth is possible. My silence is not weakness, it is medicine. My withdrawal is not abandonment, it is alignment. Consider another of Jung's insights. Every encounter is an encounter with the unconscious. The narcissist, in all their rage, was also a teacher, not by kindness, but by cruelty. They forced the empath to see their own shadow, their hidden hunger to be needed, their fear of being alone. And by seeing it, the empath begins to integrate it. Integration is the true gold of alchemy. Out of the blackness of Negredo comes the glimmer of a new dawn. The empath begins to feel wholeness stir a strength not rooted in others' approval, but in their own alignment with self. And yet, the cost remains. For to claim this wholeness, the empath must let go not only of the narcissist, but of the fantasy that love can save those who refuse to face themselves. This is grief. Not grief for the narcissist, but grief for the dream that died. The empath weeps not only for what was, but for what could never be. Jung knew this grief. He wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The empath's tears are the water nourishing those roots. Without grief, there is no growth. Without mourning the illusion, there is no awakening to reality." And so, the empath walks forward. They are scarred. Yes, but the scars are not signs of defeat. They are hieroglyphs of transformation. Each wound tells a story. Here, I gave too much. Here, I silenced myself. Here, I carried what was not mine. And here I set it down. You, listening, feel the resonance in your own body. You remember the weight you carried. You remember the day you set it down. You remember the storm that followed. And you know deep down that was the day you began to live as yourself. The narcissist may still rage, still haunt, still seek. But the empath has crossed the threshold. They are no longer defined by another's hunger. They are defined by the self-whole, sovereign, unshakable. The empath's awakening is not a single event, it is a pilgrimage. And like all pilgrimages, it demands not just the leaving behind of what was toxic, but the deliberate walking toward what is real. Jung called this the confrontation with the unconscious, a journey through archetypal forces that shape our lives without our awareness. For the empath, the greatest archetypal force to confront is the rescuer. This is the role they have played in every relationship. Often since childhood, the one who absorbs the family's tension, who soothes the parents' rage, who makes themselves invisible so others can shine. The rescuer role is noble on the surface, but beneath it lurks a hidden hunger, the hope that if I heal enough, if I give enough, if I bend enough, I will finally be loved. When the empath withdraws from the narcissist, this hope dies, and with it, the rescuer archetype begins to collapse. Jung compared individuation to alchemy, the transformation of base metal into gold. The rescuer archetype is the base metal heavy, limiting, repetitive. It must be melted down in the crucible of grief and solitude. Only then can the gold emerge the self, radiant and sovereign. But here's the paradox. As the empath lets go of the rescuer, they feel unbearable guilt. It is as if they are betraying their deepest values. They hear the narcissist's voice echoing, "You are selfish. You are cruel. You are nothing without me." These words cut because they touch an old wound, the empath's own belief that their worth lies in service. This is the moment Jung described as the battle with the shadow. For the shadow is not only rage and boundaries, it is also self-love. To embrace self-love feels, at first, like sin. But as the empath slowly holds it, like a fragile ember, it begins to glow. Picture this. An empath walks through a dark forest in a dream. They hear cries for help all around them, voices pleading, accusing, demanding. At first, they run to each voice, trying to soothe, trying to fix. But no matter what they do, the voices grow louder, more frantic, more endless. Exhausted, they fall to their knees. And then they notice a small flame burning at their feet. A lantern. They pick it up, and in its glow, the voices fade into shadows. The dream ends with the empath walking on, lantern in hand, alone, but no longer afraid. Jung would say this is the symbol of individuation. The lantern is the self, the inner light that needs no validation, no external supply. The empath has discovered that they are not defined by the cries of others, but by the flame within. In waking life, this discovery often takes subtle forms. The empath says no for the first time without explaining. They choose rest instead of rescuing. They stop answering the narcissist's midnight texts. These acts may look small, but psychologically they are seismic. Each no is an alchemical spark, burning away centuries of conditioning. And as the empath changes, the narcissist darkens. To them, this evolution feels like betrayal. Their control slips, their mask fractures further. They may become more vicious, or more pitiful, or both at once. They may unleash what Jung called the possessed state, where the ego is taken over by an archetype. In this case, the tyrant victim. One moment they are accusing you of evil, the next they are begging for your return. This oscillation is not love, it is survival, and the empath begins to see it clearly. Here lies another danger, the temptation to turn the empath's awakening into superiority. I am whole, they are broken. This too is a trap of the ego. Jung warned that inflation, the belief that we are beyond shadow, is as dangerous as repression. The true task is humility to know that both light and shadow live within. The empath's healing, then, is not about defeating the narcissist. It is about integrating themselves, to see their own shadow anger, boundaries, the need to be needed and hold it with compassion, to see their own light tenderness, depth, love, and protect it with strength. This is wholeness. And when wholeness emerges, something extraordinary happens. The empath begins to attract new patterns. Where once they drew in takers and abusers, they now draw in allies and equals. Where once they gave away their energy, they now circulate it wisely. This is not mystical, it is psychological. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. By making their unconscious rescuer role conscious, the empath changes fate itself. You feel this, don't you? The possibility that your life could unfold differently, that your love could be received without exploitation, that your boundaries could be honored without punishment, that your silence could be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. And yet the cost remains. For every step into sovereignty, the empath must leave behind the illusion that they can heal those who refuse to face themselves. They must grieve not only the narcissist, but the child within them who long to be loved for their giving. This grief is not weakness, it is purification. Tears are alchemical waters, dissolving the last clinging threads of illusion. And when the tears dry, what remains is clarity. I am not defined by what I give. I am defined by what I am. And so, the empath's journey continues not as a rescuer, not as a victim, but as a sovereign soul carrying a lantern into the unknown. The narcissist may rage in the distance, but their storm no longer dictates the empath's weather. This is the transformation Jung foresaw, the shift from living as mask and mirror to living as self. The empath, once consumed by others' shadows, now becomes the guardian of their own flame. And in this flame, the story ends not with vengeance, but with rebirth. If this journey resonates with you, comment, "I protect my sacred flame." Your healing is not only the reclamation of your own soul, it is the spark that lights a path for countless others who are still lost in the storm. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.